Okay, now we're live. Hi, Ellie.
Hi.
We're so glad to have you today.
I'm so excited to be here. This is going to be great.
There's only an hour, so let's... and there are 18 people out there waiting, so let's just get started.
Let's jump on. Okay. So I'm just going to be talking today about taking your plein air sketches and composing a studio mountain scene specifically. So these are paintings right here that I did at Blanche Lake. This one specifically last summer up, I think it's Big Cottonwood Canyon. Anyway, so it's really beautiful up there, and I went up with a friend and just took this book with me, and I really like this book because it makes things not precious, and also I like it because I can really flip through it quickly. So I can do like a plein air sketch like this, and then like 45 minutes later I'm doing this, 30 minutes later I'm doing this. So I spent an entire day just like painting over and over again scenes like this.
What kind of paper? Is it just regular paper? What is it?
It's a paper off Amazon. I like sell these books. I make them, but okay. Yeah. So if you want one, you can contact me, but it's off Amazon. So, so I just like how fast this whole thing is because I can get so much more done in a day than I would if I went up with a panel like this and went up and plein air painted. It would probably take me twice as long, and I only get like 2 of these done. Mm-hmm. So I like to do these plein air sketches because going plein air is really just about, you know, capturing the accurate color and the accurate value of a scene so that when you come into the studio, you can work on the composition and fix out like the kinks and really like end and create a really strong piece. So we're going to use this one today to create, and I'll show you how to compose a studio painting. So here we go.
So when you went out to do that, did you do it in gouache?
No, this is oil.
That's oil?
Yeah.
Oh.
Lots of people actually think it's gouache because it has like a really flat look to it. But it's just like I use more of my medium, which is a Neomagil, and then turpentine, and it kind of like thins it out, and the paper is a little more absorbent. So it looks like...
Did you just go straight on paper?
Yeah.
You can prime it? Wow.
Yeah,
that's
I know.
Cool.
Yeah, I think you can. I have a friend who like shellacks it and sprays it, but when you fold it over, like you can see on the back side, it dries so fast that I can flip through these super quickly. And if you shellac it, it'll like kind of stamp it a little bit, and the pages can stick a little. So anyway.
Interesting.
Yeah, so I'm going to put this down just so I can use this for mixing. So I'll be using just this as reference next to me along with like this photo. So I find that when I come into the studio with my reference, a lot of times with my plein air, a lot of times like there's a lot of ambiguity in different areas. Like I just can't figure out what's going on because I was reacting so quickly to just the color that a lot of times it doesn't make sense. So that's why you have to take a lot of photo reference when you go out, but I come back in the studio and then all of a sudden I'm looking, I'm like, okay, that makes more sense. Like it's like, I did that weird rock thing, but actually this is what's happening with the form. So I use a lot of photo reference combined with this to create a studio painting. So really quick about my palette, I use titanium white, lemon yellow, cad red, and ultramarine blue, and that's it. And I like...
Is that your typical palette?
Yeah, so I use this plein air painting, and in the studio, sometimes I'll add an alizarin crimson just to get like a variation in my temperature of red. But, and to like make the atmosphere recede more with that purple color. But I find that like I really like using the limited palette because it just, I don't know, you'd think it would constrain you, but actually like after you get used to it, it's really freeing because I find when I put other colors on my palette, I start making shortcuts and then everything feels like really sap green. Like all my greens feel too sap green because I have like this shortcut to get to my color. But when I have just a limited palette, it forces me to like mix through all the different variation. Colors.
And is there a reason why you use lemon yellow instead of... It's a cooler yellow, right?
Yeah, so I like the lemon yellow because as you push back with your greens, you can keep them cool and keep them farther away. So if you use a cad yellow, a lot of times it keeps it too orange. So as you're pushing your greens back, they feel too forward and they kind of lose their ability to like really push far into the distance. Cool. So anyway, So I'm going to start out with just talking about composition here really quick with mountain scenes. So I'm just going to go in and start with kind of like a lighter wash. So with mountain scenes, there's certain things you want to avoid. Of course, there's exceptions to the rules, but I'm going to talk about the main thing. So something with mountain scenes that's really important is the horizon line. So you have your horizon line low in most mountain scenes, because if you put it too high, then you start to create a problem with like dual interest. So here I kind of have like, there's a cloud up here, but there's this waterfall. So your eye is kind of bouncing back between like these two focal points, and it's a little unclear of what the painter is trying to get you to look at. So you want a low horizon, because if you put like a really, so let's say you put like a high horizon in, then you're going to have a lot of foreground space that you're going to have to cover, and you're not going to be able to emphasize the mountain. So you want to put in a really low horizon line so that we can really like emphasize our peak.
Yeah. And that's your great signature art form in a way, right? Your mountain scene is just amazing.
Oh, thanks.
I love it, because to me it's so, there's so much going on, the rock forms and everything.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you gotta simplify in a way to make it strong, right?
Yeah, I feel like when you're when you're raised in Utah, you can't help but love the mountains. It's like,
right?
It's like the greatest thing in the world. Okay, so I'm just gonna put in like a general horizon line here. So things to avoid. We want to avoid putting our peak right in the center. We want to avoid having angles that are really similar in our mountain scenes. Because they just feel really fake. And you want to avoid as well just having the angles that come down from the mountain, but as well you have to think about the foreground or the mid-ground kind of hills and things that are coming in. So you don't want things to line up too much, and that I'll talk about that as I paint through this whole scene. So here we go. So I'm going to start. I'm just going to pull my peak off from the center. I'm going to put it just around here. Something else to think about is if you frame this, like how far is your frame going to overlap? And if there's a shadow that kind of gets cast by that frame. So if you put your peak really close to the top, then you're just going to kind of have this cutoff point, and it's going to create a really weird tangent for your viewer. So make sure you're not putting your peak too high. So I'm going to put my peak right here. I'm going to start with just some angles. So I don't want to go this way, so I got to think, you know, like what am I going to do with my angles to make them different? That might be a little too similar. It also comes down to like where your out jets are, or your wings, I guess. So you've got things that are going to poke out from the side, or places where there's going to be an abrupt change in your angle. So you're going to want to make sure that you have variety in that as well. So I don't want to put something, for example, I don't want to like put this right here where it's going to come across and cut in with this. So maybe I'll like bring it down a little bit and create something like that.
Right now, are you kind of sketching out almost like the contour line, or say if you're doing a figure drawing?
Yeah.
You're kind of getting that envelope of the big shape, right?
Yeah, it's like that. It's just like a contour line. And it's like rocks are very linear, like mountain scenes. There's just a lot of cliffs, a lot of things that create drama, and that drama is like drawn by a lot of linear design in your mountains. It gives like that grandeur feel to things. See, that's like a repetition right there. So this is how the beginning stage goes for me, is it's just like looking at the whole and trying to capture, like making sure there's not repetition in the things that I'm creating. So if I keep that. And I'm not super picky about how I use like my red and my blue for this beginning stage, but I'm not too picky about how saturated it is. Okay, so then I've got to think, if this is coming down here, I don't want this part to come across at the same length, so I'll probably pull this down. This is that back receding mountain peak. And I like the idea of having it kind of come down in this way. So it feels like, so I want to avoid this. I'm getting a little too much of that.
So I see right now you are using the reference and your study from plein air, but doing a lot of design.
Yeah.
And move things around, right?
Yeah, because when I'm doing the plein air, I still think about design and things when I'm out in the field doing plein air paintings, but I like to emphasize everything when I'm in the field about like just capturing things accurately. Because when you're out painting a plein air scene, your sun is moving, everything's changing. So the longer you take just like trying to articulate, like get everything right with your design, you're just losing a lot of time that you could be spending on getting some really accurate value and color notes. Okay, so now I'm going to think about this. So this comes down to the middle. I've got enough variation that I could have something similar to this happen, but I'm going to cut it off, I think. Trying to create a really grand feel, but I want to make sure that I'm not cutting in with my value too much to create equality, because I'm trying to keep things random, because there's not, let's see, things just aren't perfect in nature and well organized, and that's what makes it beautiful. And a lot of times, well, our brain is just naturally wants to organize things, and so you want to make sure you're avoiding organization. So if you're really good at keeping a dirty bedroom, then you're probably really good at painting. Just kidding. Okay. So I've got this cool rock slide that really has this nice motion to it, but I don't want to have this kind of swoop too much. I don't want a perfect circle here. So I'm going to try and pull that down. So maybe I can create an angle here and then swing this up. And create more drama that way. And try not to get too much value.
Thanks to my dog, it feels like we're outdoor painting, plein air.
Yep, we're plein air painting. Okay, so I got this thing, got this thing. This isn't that bad, but I just want to make sure. So this is like the center. So as things recede, the shapes will get closer with your mountains because they'll get smaller. Yeah,
just gonna chase every single
She's a good guard dog.
You guys ever get close to Alpine Main Street, he might recognize that bark.
Yeah. Okay. And as I go through the painting, like finishing this whole thing out, I'll keep recognizing things like this. So like this would feel too similar, so I don't want to cut this off. So I want to make sure that this shape stays whole because I'm just looking to avoid repetition. Okay, so I have my water line. I'm gonna pull it down. So I feel like, so I've got a lot of nice lines coming this way. Some coming this way, but most of them are over here. So I feel like I need something that's gonna shoot up this way, because I've got a lot of this going towards the center, and so I need something to like offset that a little bit. So I'm gonna throw this in.
Do you have any tips to up your design game? Because a lot of stuff you're doing here is really just design, right?
Yeah, so I think doing a lot of times before I do a bigger studio piece, so this is just an 11 by 14, so it's not super big, but before I do a really large studio piece, I'll do a lot of little value sketches, just with like, try and keep it down to like just a couple values, or linear sketches even. So just like looking at photos of like anywhere you've been, just scenes, and just using those photos to create a lot of nice linear drawings. And then you can pick from those which one you want to do for your final scene. My camera is slowly slipping away.
Yeah.
That's fine. It's fine. I've got all that space, so we can slide all of once. Okay. And then I in this study that I did, I just cut the viewer off at the water. And that's not a good thing to do. You can do it, but I wouldn't recommend it, because what you do when you cut your viewer off just at your water is your viewer just kind of gets stuck right there. Because when you're standing in front of a scene, you kind of want to find your way around and through to explore. And so if you put something here in the foreground, it can be just like the smallest indication of land. It doesn't have to be like taking up a lot of your scene, but just something small. Then you can your viewer is able to be like, okay, well, I can walk around the rim of this lake, and then I'm going to come up here, and I'm going to try and make my way through this rock field, and then I'm going to get up here, and I can kind of wind my way back here. So you want to give your viewer just an idea of like, where could I venture through this scene? So think of someone just like hiking along. So I did this study, and then after it, I did this one, which is just a close-up of this spot right here in the scene. And if I would have tried to put all of that detail right here, I would have just like captured a few strokes of things that were happening. But because I just flipped over, started a new scene, and did all of this, when I go into the studio, I have like a whole chunk of different color and detail that I could use to pull into a larger studio, instead of only having like 5 brush strokes to work with. So probably use that a little bit later as well for reference. But okay, so we've got something for a viewer to wind around, find their way through the lake. And now we're going to get started just really quick on trying to work in the values.
We can see a lot of these sketches or your studies on your Instagram account, right?
Yeah.
I just follow you. We can see your adventure and how you handle all these things you just talk about.
Yeah, I do a lot. I love the books because they're not precious. I feel like with a panel, when I go up, I think about, okay, I bought this panel. It cost money. I got to make a really good painting, and that just like freezes me up. And I'm just like, okay, I got to make something good, and then it takes me a really long time to paint something, and then I end up just not having as much material when I get back from like an amazing place that I should have been taking advantage of being in front of. Okay, so I am going to just jump right in with value. I'm going to try and use, I usually jump in with color as well when I'm starting a scene. So I still have my linear design, and as I work through this with value, I can think about that. So I'm just trying to, as much as you can at the beginning of a painting when you're in the studio, just try and continue to think about the whole painting. So even when you're like up here working on stuff, you need to be thinking, okay, I'm going down this way. What's happening here? What's happening here? Like, is this equal distance to this and to this? It's like, that's pretty close. I mean, let's see. I am going to be filling this in, so it's not as big of a deal, but maybe I should just like move this over a little bit. So I like to keep a really drenched turpentine rag. It's my eraser. Okay, so here we go. I'm going to pull this in. I'm looking again for variation in the size of my shapes now. So I've got variation in my linear design. So now I'm just looking for variety in my value design. So that's what we're moving into. use a big brush because I feel like with rocks and things, well, just everything, using a big brush, it just like fills in things nicely and quickly. And then you get later when you're coming in to do detail, you have a nice variation in your painting with your brush strokes. Because if you start with a really small brush and you just go for it and you're trying to like scrub everything in, then you get these tiny little brush strokes. And then when you come in to do more detail, then you're getting the same type of brush strokes, just these small little brush strokes. So if you start with a big brush, it's not only good for just like laying in your general scene, but it is also good for your end painting because you'll just have a lot more variation. So looking at the photo and then like just looking at this, I have like these really beautiful warm reds and oranges and things, and like this crazy green. Like when you're on location and you're painting things like this, like those are things your eye reacts to. But in a photograph, you just lose all of that.
So you really just use a reference as a reference point. You're not copying what your picture is showing.
Yeah, I don't copy my photograph because I copy it for like form and understanding of what's happening in the piece. But I try not to copy it for like color or value because it can distort things so much.
And I think that's a huge benefit of doing plein air as often as you can because you are seeing so much more on location. Yeah. But if you just stick to, I know a lot of landscape, there's nothing wrong with it from painting from the photographs, right? But
yeah, there's not.
In a way, you could limit your, not your skills, but the outcome of your painting if you do strictly from the photograph.
Yeah. Well, and I think like you can improve like faster if you go out and plein air paint because you're building up a personal like store of knowledge of what's happening. So if you stay inside, you can like learn a lot of things like, oh, as things go back and they get bluer, and as this happens, or like reflected light is going to cause this in my scene. A lot of stuff like that you can learn, but without going outside and actually seeing it in person, a lot of times it feels a little fake. So for example, back here, I just barely put this kind of warmer color that I captured when I was on scene. And I think if I was in the studio with just looking at photo reference without a plein air sketch, I would think, okay, this is further away, so I'm going to make it bluer and lighter because that's just mentally what I know. But looking at my plein air sketch, I'm like, okay, something must have been happening over here on the right that's creating a nice bounce light into this scene. And so when you have a photograph and you're just looking at this section of your painting, you're losing everything around it that's interacting. And so you can get a lot of understanding and you can fake it pretty far, but there's just nothing better than doing a really nice plein air study and then bringing it in and using it to be able to create a lot of accuracy in your piece. Okay, so something I'm seeing from the photo reference right now that I didn't really capture in my study is that there's like a canyon. It's not so much a canyon, but there's just like the form of this mountain is wrapping around and then kind of chopping back into the second half and then coming out. And I can see that really well in the photo reference, but in the actual plein air study, it doesn't make sense because I was just trying to capture down color and things as quickly as possible. Okay. So got this and this feel a little similar. So something I'm thinking about now is my value pattern. So right now I've kind of got this giant chunk of a light and this giant chunk of dark, and they're feeling very balanced right now. So I need to decide if I'm going to be cutting in here further with my dark or if I'm going to be cutting in with my light. And I think it'll be more dramatic if I cut in with my dark. My light source is coming from this direction, so I'll have a lot of really nice highlight, bright edges and forms catching right here. And then I have this like kind of middle value face, and I'm going to push this middle value just a tiny bit towards my dark so that it builds in with a single mass so that I have some variation. Because otherwise I would have just like half and half, and I want to be avoiding that. Okay.
Okay, our good friend Kai over here, he's asking, he always asks good questions, and I love having him here. When you started out painting, did you paint more from life? And when did you feel comfortable enough to trust yourself to work on photos?
So I had some really good teachers who told me to paint from life all the time. Like starting in like junior high, I remember my teacher just being like, everybody has to do 5 pages of drawing from life homework. And I was just like, I just want to draw from a photo. This is the worst. I would go around my grandma's house and be like, what weird thing can I draw now? Because there's nothing left to draw that interests me. I was like, I just want to draw cool stuff, but I have to draw like a watering can. Anyway, so I like drew and painted from life just like really early on. And then I started painting from photographs, I think more just like a couple years ago. And honestly, I feel like it's still a little bit more uncomfortable than it is when I just paint right from a plein air sketch to a studio, because there's always an ambiguity. You're always kind of trying to guess your way through. And I think for me, I love color. And so when I'm trying to guess my way through a painting, trying to figure out what color certain things are, that just doesn't come through in a photo. So sorry, I totally lost my train of thought. Anyway, it doesn't come through in a photo, so I always feel more comfortable painting from plein air, but I am starting to feel more comfortable painting from photographs just because I have started building up that knowledge. But I think it's a lifelong thing. Like building up a store of knowledge is just takes a lot of brain power. So I think the more you get outside and observe, the better. Okay.
4:27.
Okay. There we go.
Light is changing.
The light is changing.
Light is changing. And let's talk about that a little bit.
Okay,
that's everybody's challenge, right? When you paint from light, a cloud could just roll in. Yeah. Or the wind will be blowing.
It's the worst. So I actually really like to, when stuff like that starts happening and you're in a scene and you're like, hey, there's a lot of clouds, just like mentally preparing for it is really, really helpful. So just making a note, okay, I see this cloud, it's coming, it's going to be covering this part of my scene. This is what I need to capture right now. So, or a sunset, like you see the sun is setting on like your mountain scene, and as it's going, light is just starting to fade from the top, and you're just trying to grasp that one thing. You just have to think, okay, I've seen a million sunsets. I know that the top of my mountain is going to be getting a lot warmer, and I'm going to lose my foreground to darkness. So what am I going to focus on? And at that point, I like to focus on like the shadow shapes and in the mountain, because I know that my foreground will change, but if I capture the shadow shapes in my mountain before the color in the mountain changes, then I can come back and I can focus on the warmth in the mountain later, as well as capturing the correct colors and value of the foreground and the shadow. I mean, that's also just predicting what you're going to want from the scene. Okay, as your sky goes towards the sun, it gets yellower. And that's something you'll see in nature.
And that's... Oh, sorry.
No, you're good. That's just like a good example of something that like you've learned over time. Yeah. You're like, I've observed that, so now I know that that's kind of what happens. I'm just going to lay that in.
That's kind of what I was going to say is when you go out there, you got to learn with a purpose, right? You're observing things, and the more you learn to see, the better you paint. Yeah. You don't just go out there and say, all right, there's sky, and just do, all right, blue, and the whole thing is just blue. Yeah. Right? There's actually subtleties in there.
Yeah. You really gotta like You really got to be observant. When you go out plein air painting, it's all about just copying what's in front of you and being able to capture that accurately with your eyes. And when you come in the studio, it's like this is the time to really start thinking about where I'm going to place things and how I'm going to manipulate all those things that I've observed. Okay. So I really like to use a synthetic flat when I'm doing mountains and rock scenes because I feel like it just gives me a really sharp edge. Like you can see there, if I use like if I use a bristle as I've like done up in here, a lot of times it just gives like this texture, which is really beautiful to oil painting, but the edges is just a lot softer. So it was a game changer for me when I started using a flat synthetic, because I was like, oh wow, look at these sharp edges that I've been missing.
Yeah.
It's like rocks, synthetic flat.
And also your bristle flats, after you scrub it for a while, you turn into a filbert.
I know. I know, that's happened to me so many times. Well, and my filbert, like filberts were my favorite brush, and I was like, I'm gonna paint everything with a filbert. Filberts are amazing. Yeah. And then I was like, oh wait, actually, I can't paint rocks.
For rocks, maybe not.
I can't paint anything. Okay, so in the studio, when I'm doing things like a rock slide, I like to come in, so I'm capturing, let me see, this color that I've got. So I've got this really nice color under here, and that color is like a kind of like a mid in between of the shadows that are from that rock slide, all those rocks, and the lights. So a lot of times what I like to do is I'll come in and I'll do just that mid kind of in between of those values. And then I'll come in with like a warmer color and I'll just kind of play around in here a little bit. And then after my painting is dried right here, I can scumble across with a lighter color and it'll just like create
cool texture.
Yeah. So like I can try and do it when I'm out plein air painting. So you can see there's kind of like this scumbling in here. But it just gives me an idea like, okay, I can go in and create some really nice, so that's just the light reflecting up in there. Just all of that color and saturation is just coming from that light reflection. Something really important about color mixing, it's like the key to good color, is understanding white. So white is a graying color, and it's also blue. So you think of white and you don't really think of it as a hue in itself because it's just white, but whenever you mix white with something, it's going to make it cooler. So that's something to keep in mind while you're painting. And it's a grayer as well. So let me just so if I have just a giant thing, let's say I'm trying to create a nice green for like a pine tree. I'm just going to throw that in there because it's a nice watercolor. And so I'm trying to create this dark green. So I'm like, I have blue on my palette right here. So I'm going to jump in and I'm going to make green using yellow. And I'm going to make green. Okay, well, that's too light. So I'm going to throw in some more blue, more blue, more blue. And you're just trying to create this nice green. And you go and you're like, okay, I really like that green. There we go. And you're just like, what's wrong with that green? It feels kind of like strange, turquoisey gray. And you can spend hours doing this and you just mess around with it and you keep going. You're trying to get this perfect green when the problem is your white. Like that's what's causing the problem.
Too much white.
You're using a light blue to try and get to that green. So stop making trying to like make a shortcut for yourself and just start with your yellow and your blue. Whoa, got some red. Yellow, blue. I love red in my greens though. It's like also a game changer, is putting red in your greens.
This is how you warm it up because you have cool yellow, right? You gotta somehow warm it up if you have to.
So just look at that. Like look at that difference. It's like how much that was so much faster trying to get to a nice deep green than trying to get to a deep green because it's just being contaminated by white. So you get in there. That was a much darker value. Yeah, so now I'm just gonna mush in here. But white's not always bad. So that's the thing about white, is the graying down. So if you understand that it grays down, then it can be, it can save you a lot of time and heartache trying to get the right color, but it can also be used as a tool for you as you're painting. So I've got this green up here, and I'm trying to gray it down so that it recedes into the distance. So I can use some red, complementary color, and I can use some red to just pull this green back, and I can pull it into the distance with some of this red. And I like to, just throw it in the foreground too every once in a while. Get some color variation. You got some dead trees up there. But then as you're getting further back, you're going to start losing some of that. And that's when you're going to hit into your white. So you hit into your white, the further back you go, and it's going to gray back your yellows a lot and just make them recede really nicely. So that in the front, you can have just these really powerful, really saturated greens. And then you can just get some nice recession here. So try and think of white as like a bluish gray color, and it'll really help you avoid a lot of things like that. Okay. So I'm thinking about my value pattern here. We've got this, trying to avoid that. So we avoided that by doing that. So now I want to do this rock slide. It's coming down over here. So I got to think of my light source coming this way. There's a Carlson's Guide to Landscape Painting. He talks about the different planes that are being hit by light and the different values that they will be. So your sky will be your highest value, and then it'll be your ground plane because that's what's getting hit most by the sun and the sky. And then it'll be your slanted planes because they're also getting hit more, but then once you hit your vertical planes, they're getting hit a lot less by the sunlight and the light of the sky. So as I'm doing this rock slide kind of section over here, I'm making sure that it's lighter in value than up in here so that it does feel like it's slanting instead of being a form that's going straight up and down.
Understanding the light and how light behaves is like for a figure painters, they need to learn anatomy of human figure, right?
Yeah.
And in landscape, that is kind of almost the same idea. Learning how the light behaves.
Yeah, that's a great metaphor.
Really, like everything that. You see is just how the light.
Perfect.
I don't know. Sometimes I have good ideas.
Yeah. Write these down.
Write it down.
You could be making the next like book on art. It's like Guide to Landscape Painting. You can have all sorts of cool stuff in there.
I will teach you how to paint a gallery-like painting in 5 steps.
5 steps. Something that is really important to painting is contrast. I mean, that's like knowing where to push the contrast, knowing where to hold back on the contrast, but contrast like has to exist in your painting. So when you're painting and trying to do a studio piece, you need to be thinking about your value pattern, and you need to be thinking about the contrast of your values. So it's really easy to get stuck and lost into these shadows, starting to do details and getting more color and more whites and more light because you're seeing so much detail back there. And then you're done with your shadows and you're like, that looks perfect. And you move on to your lights and you realize there's just this whole range that you can't access anymore. So if you make this too light, there's only so far you can go on your light side to brighten things up. So you really have to keep in mind that you've got to from the beginning make sure you're thinking about your contrast.
So you don't want your value to be too tight.
Yeah.
In a certain range, then you kind of handcuff yourself from the get-go. Yeah,
think about like your value scale, you know. You've got like your 8s, your 7, 8, and 9 in your shadows, and then like why not jump all the way down to like your 3, 4, 5, and then you can like use 6 to kind of mix in and manipulate with your like details. So if you do that, then you're keeping your contrast up.
That's very interesting because I'm not a great landscape painter. That's why I do it wrong. Like I would do like 9 or 10 to do my details, but that's not good.
Yeah,
I see what you're saying. Like, then you just get like darker and darker and darker. Then it doesn't read as well. But.
Well, and the other interesting thing that you're kind of like using 9 and 10 to create details can be like a good thing when you hit the foreground, because your foreground is your highest area of contrast.
More saturated too, right?
Yeah, so it's more saturated. It's got the most contrast. So you've got to kind of keep in, as you're painting your whole scene, you got to keep in a reserve so that when you get to the end of your painting, you can really hit areas with like the best and most beautiful contrast and color saturation. It's like that's where you want to be at the end. Okay. So I'm just putting in like the darkest kind of warm dark that I have, which is ultramarine blue and a cad red. And I'm just throwing this right into the foreground tree that I'm going to put in. Just so I can keep that. It's not going to eliminate like reflected light and all of those things in this foreground area, but it's just something to be conscious of, because you're going to have contrast in the foreground. You don't want to be getting rid of all the natural feeling of the scene. Okay, something to avoid. So I told you I'd be running through this whole scene and there'd be things I'd be catching. So I just made my pine tree in my foreground come up, and it's landing right in this crack of that.
Yeah.
So I want to make sure that I avoid that. So I can either avoid it by flattening that out, but that'll be too similar to that. So maybe I'll just like pull it this way and create a steeper peak that way.
I think that's what a lot of painters or students or even artists are struggling, is that constant reminder of checking your composition and design.
Yeah.
Because as human, we're trained to do things in a repetition way. Right?
Yeah.
Like we want to space things out nicely, evenly, and make everything kind of similar. We just gotta fight the instinct in a way that is kind of, I don't know.
Yeah,
like,
you gotta
how
fight
do you
it.
remind yourself? Just through practice, or how do you train your eye and your thoughts?
Yeah, it's through a lot of time. It's a lot of time to like get your brain into the like mindset that you're just like constantly checking for those things. But when I'm placing a brush stroke somewhere, or mostly like an item somewhere, so like I put this whole tree in, I just want to like check it. So it's like if I put this whole hillside in, I just want to check it. So checking those main sections of your painting is really helpful. So I followed this tree up and I just checked, okay, I'm going to check it this way and I'm going to check it this way. So I had it right here and it felt, actually, I think it was better. I wanted it like right here. So let's erase.
So just make it a habit, like almost your routine, right? Like if you keep checking it every time you play something, then you don't need to worry about spending 2 hours on the whole painting and then turn out you have most of the things to fix.
Yeah, it's like the whole thing. And don't be afraid of fixing stuff. Okay, so I'm just going to make a note that I want my tree to end right here. Don't be afraid of fixing things. Like, for me, I feel like I get into a section that's just super beautiful and wonderful, and I love it so much that all of a sudden I look at the composition and I'm like, you know what, I've got to put a tree, or I've got to fix this shadow spot. And because I've gotten so attached to that and thought it was so beautiful and perfect, I just like can't touch it. So like, don't be afraid. It's like, I always try and remind myself, if I painted it once, I can paint it again, which feels so like false and like such a lie, but you're like, I can do it. I painted it once, I can paint it again.
I was having like exact same conversation with Alvin the other day. He's helping me with this new piece I'm working on, and then he was saying the same thing, like don't be afraid to fix it or even wipe it, because if it happened once and you cannot duplicate it, that means it's just a happy accident. Your skill is not there yet, but if you're so
Yeah.
skilled, then you will be able to do it again.
Yep.
So don't be afraid.
Yep. And also, like, as you're finishing a painting out, make sure you're not ruining those beautiful, like, spontaneous and wonderful parts of your painting. A lot of times I feel like you see a scene, you're looking at your painting and you're trying to figure out like what's wrong with it, and you're like, what is wrong with this painting? I don't know what's wrong with it. And you're like, you know what, like I don't know what's wrong with it. So you just start going, and all of a sudden you realize you've been painting over this area that's just your favorite area. It's like the fresh, beautiful area. You're like, your brain knows how to paint this area. This is just an example, but your brain knows how to paint the spot that you love the most, that's the freshest and looks good. And because your brain knows that that is correct, it feels like comfortable painting it over and over. So you have to be conscious that, like, when you see a scene, when you see your painting and you're like, something is wrong, make sure you're not going over the part that's right just because your brain is trying to, like, trying to reassure you that you know what you're doing. Because it's like, honestly, sometimes you just got to take a break and be like, something's wrong and I'm just not going to look at it. And it's going to be okay. And I'm not going to ruin my painting by trying to fix the one thing that I had right.
Yeah. And you just start overworking it. And that's how you ruin the painting.
Yep. You just overwork the spots that you love the most. Okay, so I'm just thinking about this. I'm coming in. I've got my brush strokes. So I have, like, look how on the palette, see how, like, dark this is? Like, compared to, like, how white, like, just look at, like, I can make a really bright white with this. So I have to keep in reserve, like, there's a really nice high contrast on this, but I'm keeping in reserve these brightest brights for, like, the highlight of my painting, you know? Like, I want the viewer to look here, so I'm going to reserve this for that. I think it was Winston Churchill. Actually. He, like, got into painting later in his life, and he gave, like, a metaphor for painting being like going into war, where you have to have a tight reserve so that in the end, like, you have to have that reserve to be able to complete your painting, because you want to make sure that you're prepared to hold back when needed, so that you can really, like, finish strong. Okay, so I'm going in with a different brush, different size, so that I can just, like, play around in here, so that I'm not getting too repetitive with my strokes. So same brush size and getting really repetitive. So I want to make sure I'm adding some variety in here. And I'm going to try and get a little more stuff done before we finish up. So squinting is really good too. Yeah. Make sure you squint. You gotta squint down to see, like, where my shape's going. Anyway. Okay. Looking at my study.
So I see you changed quite a bit from your study, right?
The composition?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the main form and the light is pretty much the same. It's just you have different design this time.
Yeah, and there's a lot more color variation in my study, which is kind of crazy because it's so small. And there's so much color variation in it. It's just like reacting in the moment just makes a huge impact.
So like you said, the mountains, they have a lot of, rock cliffs, structure and form.
Yeah.
Is there any tips to capture that? Because your mountain scene is really great in a way that you make it look majestic. Like, that is so powerful when you get the form right.
Yeah.
Like, it's got that chisel look, right?
Yeah. It's just the synthetic flat.
Flat?
I'm just kidding.
I was just thinking.
I just
Must
let out
be the flat.
I let out my secret. No, I'm just kidding.
Everybody's going on to buy flats.
Yeah, everyone's going to buy flats now, synthetic flats. I think that starting with the linear design in mind is really, really important when you're doing a mountain scene, because having those strong, like a mountain with the cliffs and the form is so linear and straight and like strict with all of its design that you really want to capture that strongly in the beginning, so that when you come in, you can really and you get into these like smaller details, you can really still have that whole in focus, just like all of that design in focus. Okay. It's also direction of your brush strokes, I think, a lot of time. So you're doing a lot of like painting with the form, just like you would in like figurative work. So you paint the arm and you're going to paint with the form.
Yeah.
The same thing applies with a mountain. So like when I get into like a rock slide or like trees, you know, like a close-up tree, you start painting with the form a lot more. Or like foothills on a mountain, especially, you're really painting with the form. So when you hit a rock mountain that's just like flat, you want to be able to like chisel out and paint with the form. That doesn't mean like everything is up and down, but it means that like with a rock, like thinking of just a normal rock sitting on your table in front of you, you're really going to be doing a lot of like flat planes. And so you're going to have a lot of like, okay, I'm going to chisel this way, and then I'm going to do a flat plane this way, and then I'm going to pull this over the top this way. So things are just really chiseled out, and that helps with your mountains to look more chiseled and natural instead of looking like they're supposed to be a hill. They just look less mushy.
Like a rolling mushy hill?
Yeah, like a rolling mushy hill. It's like try and avoid that.
I mean, if that's where you live.
Yeah,
like
that's
rolling
true.
mushy hill, then that's the right thing to do. But here in Utah, it's more rocky.
Yeah. Got your desert rocks.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh yeah, those red rocks in St. George, Southern Utah area.
Yeah.
Fun.
I love painting those, but sometimes they do some really weird things. You're just like, what in the world? Like Goblin Valley or like Bryce Canyon. You're just like, I don't know what's going on here. Okay, so I just did this and I thought while I was painting this angle, okay, I painted this. What's happening over here? Like, I've got to make sure this isn't doing the same thing. So I want to make sure this is like going to be different. But then what's happening here with this? So you just want to make sure you're jumping around. Especially at the beginning of a painting, like I have a tendency to kind of come in and all of a sudden I get all excited. I'm just like, okay, I'm going to make this part look so beautiful. And I just start playing around with this. And then I step back and I'm like, oh, what was I doing? Like, this whole area got messed up because I just like wasn't focusing on the whole painting the whole time. So, and it never stops. Focusing on the whole never stops. You just kind of have to continually think about it because everything in your painting is going to affect each other.
7 minutes. Do you want to do a little bit of the water?
Minutes. Yeah, actually, it's just how did you know? I like mixed the blue and everything.
I sit behind the master control.
Okay. So the water is going to have like this cliff is going to be reflecting down into the water. So it is going to be like darker over here, a little more purple. I put in that nice green because I liked it, but honestly, it probably would not be right there. So in my in the actual painting I did like a mirror, like this lake was like a mirror reflection. It was perfect, which is beautiful, but I don't really want to have that exact thing happen with this scene because it can feel just too chopped up and perfect. Like just like everything feels like it's falling off of the edge of the canvas. So I should have put that in second. Oh well. Okay.
Okay.
So I'm gonna come down.
Charlie has a question.
Uh-huh.
And he's wondering, can I ask her thoughts on chiseling out forms when it comes to trees or bushes?
Oh, okay. Well, let me see. Let's see how much we can do. Okay, I'm gonna throw in some water here. So as water gets closer, and then I'll promise I'll get into that with this tree right here really fast. So I'm gonna get, water gets warmer as it gets closer, which luckily I have that other study I was able to capture, but the light from the sky will also hit down. So you wanna make sure you do get a little bit of like a purple in there as well. So you're gonna just attack the palette with as much speed and viciousness as I can right now. Okay. And then the same thing is happening underwater that would be happening as you look at mountains receding. You're going to have like atmosphere in your water as you look down. And it's going to recede back, and the values will get closer and closer as they recede. So you're just going to kind of
mush it up.
Mush it up.
Your fingers are the best paintbrushes you can buy.
I know, ever. And you know what? A good tip, put lotion on your hands before you paint.
Yep.
Yes. And then
invisible
gloves. Off. It comes off, and then you can still use your fingers, and it's a little more protective, which is so nice. Okay, so what I like to do to chisel out... Woo, sorry, Keith.
It's all right.
Okay. So I like to put in my tree, and I like to think about variation while I'm putting in my tree. So I've got like, I'm just gonna really have to load this up, and that is too dark. That is too dark for an upright plane, especially a pine tree, but I'm just gonna leave it because I'm running out of time, so I'll fix that later. Okay, so I got my tree. And I'm trying to think, okay, I don't want these to be the same. I want this to be different. But a lot of times it's really hard to think through all of that. And then I can come in from the outside. I think this is what you were talking about. And I can come in and I can chisel into this. Try and keep your color pure as you're chiseling back in. And with pine trees, try and keep things horizontal as you're chiseling, because the branches lay a little more horizontal. With other things, when you're putting in sky holes and such, you can be a little more liberal with your shapes. But certain trees will lend themselves to have different feelings and different color too. Like some of the trees in this are really warm, so I'm guessing a lot of them are like a Douglas fir, but you still have like some blue spruce mixed in there. Okay, and then I lost something else really important about trees and bushes is think about them as being grounded down into the earth. So you've got this tree or this bush, and it's got these roots down in the ground, and it's growing up and out. So as you're painting, you want to be drawing your brush strokes in towards the center of your tree, so that it feels like it's coming out or out towards the outside if you're using shadow. So if you're doing shadow, which you just kind of... Is this getting glare? Anyway. So you're going to paint out kind of like with the shadows so you can feel that form. And then you can paint in with your lights as they come in towards.
Oh.
So you get this nice form over the top of your...
Out with the shadows and in with the lights.
Yep. And then it feels like it's kind of growing towards this like rooted spot. Whereas if you're just like going up and down like a mountain, or if you're just kind of... So you do, I just was going to say going over and around like a circle, which is true when you're at the center of the painting. But if you're doing a bush or a tree that is not a pine tree that's rounded, then after you pull everything down to the center or pull stuff out from the center, you're going to go over the top, and you're just going to, here, I'm just going to wipe this and do it right here. So you do your whole tree, and you pull everything to the center, pull everything out. And then you go over the top with your lightest color of your tree. And you're just gonna pull with the form of your tree. Make sure you got some stragglers because trees are not perfect.
And they grow in the sky.
And it grows in the sky. And it's not rooted in this case. It's not rooted at all.
It's just floating.
It's just floating there like a happy cloud tree.
But still, you are chiseling a form. It's not just some random brush stroke all over the place, right?
Yep. Okay, I'm going to put a cute little trunk in.
Yeah.
And then I can come back in with my sky and create some
sky holes.
Yeah, create some sky holes in here. So, yeah, that's a sad looking tree, but it's happy because it's just on its way to heaven. Yeah. Just kidding. Anyway, how much time do we got?
I think we're out of time.
Okay.
But oh man, there's so much to process.
But I'll just be here painting if I'm just kidding.
Well, thank you for coming today. And
yeah.
I think there's gotta be a sequel or something. People are really enjoying your show today. Everybody's super engaging, and I really enjoy watching you paint.
I'm sorry guys if I didn't get to like actually answer a lot of questions or whatever.
It's great. We even have a good crowd here on Memorial Day.
Oh, that is good.
Yeah.
Thank you guys for joining me on Memorial Day.
Yeah. Well, we have Cindy from New Zealand.
Oh, awesome.
So she's probably not doing Memorial Day today.
Oh, yeah.
So.
Awesome.
Oh, one last question. I don't want to leave this one out. How do you layer without the underpinning blending getting muddy?
I start pretty thin with my underpainting, and I use a lot of medium, which is like this Neomagilp stuff. So it helps it just dry a little faster and keeps it thin. And then when I go back on top, like if you look at this side of the palette instead of like this side kind of has like, see how thin that is? If you just see my brush go into it, it almost like erases it out. But in here, it's like really, well, it's harder to see in that, but it's really thick. Like I'm pushing the same amount, but it's not going away. So I just have to like really dig up a lot of paint and get it nice and thick on there. And then I can just like, I guess we'll go for the sky and then I can just really lay it on there. And that's nice and thick. But if I have too much turpentine or too much medium in my paint, when I'm trying to lay it on thick, it'll just start picking up stuff too much. So
sometimes you want that to create a softer edge or something, right? So it all depends on what kind of application, what kind of situation you're in. And like right there, your white highlight on top, that's probably where you want it laying thick and then create more of a chisel look.
Yeah, it's just like just think of it like a portrait painting. Honestly, like in a portrait, you're going to really push your detail in your lights and you're going to let your darks fall flat. And so that's kind of the same thing with the mountain.
Shape.
Yeah.
Like the value patterns all connected in.
Yeah, I think it's good to start with your darks. I mean, that's kind of, I think that's kind of a general thing with like oil and stuff, but you start with your darks and you can keep them kind of thin so that when you build on top, you can really build in this paint.
Oh yeah, and then like when you do the water, you don't want to lay thick paint down for the water part, right? You gotta have more like that kind of thin down, a little bit more watery, runny look. Okay, well I guess we have to leave and say goodbye. But thank you guys for watching and tuning in. If you have any more comments, just leave it down below in the comments, or just make sure you go follow Ellie.
Yeah, come follow me on
Instagram
and stuff.
Keep, just follow her and learn more tips from her.
If you have any questions, don't hesitate to message me on Instagram. I'm happy to answer and just reply to things. So
yeah, we really enjoy it here today.
Okay, thanks guys.
All right, see you next time. Bye.
Bye.